A child, abandoned on the side of a dusty road, no one in sight, his cries echoing into the emptiness. It's a scene that could break anyone's heart. But what if I told you that, in this moment, when all hope seemed lost, a lion, yes, a lion, stepped in, not to hunt, not to harm, but to protect? It sounds impossible, right? After all, lions are kings of the jungle, creatures whose instincts are built for survival, not compassion. But in this story, the lines between predator and protector blur in a way that will leave you stunned. It's a moment that defies all logic, one that will make you question everything you thought you knew about animals, humanity, and what true courage looks like. This isn't just another rescue story. This is something much deeper. Something that will not only tug at your heart but challenge the way you see the world. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. So, before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story that will restore their faith in the unexpected. What you're about to witness is beyond anything you've ever imagined. Stay with us, and let's see where this incredible journey leads. The boy, no more than 10 years old, wandered alone under the relentless sun, his small figure barely visible against the endless stretch of the savannah. His clothes, worn and dirty, offered little protection from the scorching heat. His face, streaked with tears, wore a look of desperation, a child lost and unsure of how to survive in a world that had suddenly turned cold and indifferent. How did he end up here? What had brought him to this lonely, unforgiving place? His cries echoed through the empty land, but there was no answer. The silence around him seemed to swallow every plea for help. A child, abandoned on the side of a dusty road, no one in sight, his cries echoing into the emptiness. It's a scene that could break anyone's heart. But what if I told you that, in this moment, when all hope seemed lost, a lion, yes, a lion, stepped in, not to hunt, not to harm, but to protect? It sounds impossible, right? After all, lions are kings of the jungle, creatures whose instincts are built for survival, not compassion. But in this story, the lines between predator and protector blur in a way that will leave you stunned. It's a moment that defies all logic, one that will make you question everything you thought you knew about animals, humanity, and what true courage looks like. This isn't just another rescue story. This is something much deeper. Something that will not only tug at your heart but challenge the way you see the world. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. So, before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story that will restore their faith in the unexpected. What you're about to witness is beyond anything you've ever imagined. Stay with us, and let's see where this incredible journey leads. The boy, no more than 10 years old, wandered alone under the relentless sun, his small figure barely visible against the endless stretch of the savannah. His clothes, worn and dirty, offered little protection from the scorching heat. His face, streaked with tears, wore a look of desperation, a child lost and unsure of how to survive in a world that had suddenly turned cold and indifferent. How did he end up here? What had brought him to this lonely, unforgiving place? His cries echoed through the empty land, but there was no answer. The silence around him seemed to swallow every plea for help. You might wonder, where was his family? How did they let him get this far, left to fend for himself in a world that was far too big for a child to navigate alone? But sometimes, life doesn't go the way we expect. Sometimes, everything can change in an instant, and we find ourselves in a place we never imagined, feeling more alone than we ever thought possible. The boy's sobs weren't just cries of fear. They were the sound of a child who feared he was forgotten, abandoned by a world that had turned its back. And just when it seemed like there was no hope left, something happened that no one could have predicted. From a distance, a rustling sound broke through the stillness. It was soft at first, almost like the wind brushing through the tall grass. But as the sound grew louder, the boy's exhausted mind began to register it. He could barely lift his head. Was it the wind, or was it something else? And then, emerging from the haze of heat and dust, a figure appeared. A lion. A lion. The very creature you would expect to see in the wild, untouchable, powerful. Yet this lion didn't approach with hostility. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. It just stood there, watching the boy with a gaze that was calm and unblinking. In that moment, the boy was frozen, unsure of what to do. His instinct told him to run, to hide from what should have been his greatest threat. But his body was too tired, too drained to move. Was this the end? Had the wild finally claimed him? Or was something else unfolding before him? The lion, instead of advancing, sat down in the grass. Its piercing eyes never left the boy. The air around them seemed still, as if time had slowed down. There was no aggression in the lion's posture, no threat in its presence. It wasn't the predator he had been taught to fear, it was simply there, existing in the same space as him. And in that moment, something strange happened. The boy felt a shift. Fear didn't grip him the way it should have. For the first time since he had been left alone, he didn't feel alone. Was it possible that the lion, this powerful, untamed creature, wasn't here to harm him? Was it offering something else? Could there be some unspoken understanding between them? Something beyond the natural order of predator and prey? Why didn't the lion attack? Why didn't it follow its instincts and see the boy as an easy target? These questions don't have simple answers. There are no clear explanations. But as the boy looked into the lion's eyes, he felt a bond forming between them, something beyond what he had ever known. The lion, without making a sound, stayed by the boy's side. The boy's sobs slowed, his breaths deepened, and though the world still seemed uncertain, there was now something different in the air. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. What would happen next? Would the lion leave him, or would it remain, a protector in a world that had forgotten the boy? What unfolds next in this remarkable encounter will make you believe in the power of unlikely friendships, of the connections that transcend everything we think we know. Stay with me, because what happens next is something you won't expect. The lion remained by the boy's side, motionless but present. It could have easily left, it could have turned back to the savannah and disappeared into the wild, but it didn't. Instead, the beast lay there, watching the boy as if it were waiting for something, a sign, perhaps, that the boy was ready to trust this strange moment. The boy, though still uncertain, could feel the weight of the lion's calmness. There was no more fear. It had dissolved into something softer, something he didn't have a name for. His heart, once racing in terror, now beat more slowly, almost in sync with the lion's steady, rhythmic breathing. But even in this unexpected stillness, the boy's situation was not resolved. His hunger clawed at him, his throat was dry, and his body screamed for water. There was no escaping the harsh reality of the savannah, no ignoring the dangers that lay all around him. The lion may have offered him company, but it couldn't give him food or shelter. The boy shifted slightly, glancing around the land that seemed endless, desolate. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. He couldn't just sit and wait for something to change. He had to find a way out, to survive on his own, even if the lion was offering some kind of strange protection. But just as the boy's mind started to race with plans that seemed far too big for him to carry alone, something changed. The lion, once so still, now stood up. The boy, startled, stiffened. Was it leaving? Was it done with him? But the lion didn't walk away. It turned its body and started to move forward, not at a run, not in a rush, but with a slow, purposeful pace. It paused, as if checking to see if the boy was following. For a moment, there was a question hanging in the air. Would the boy get up? Would he follow? The boy's gaze flickered between the lion and the wide, empty landscape ahead. He didn't know what to do. Everything in him screamed to move, to follow the lion. It was the only thing in this vast world that hadn't shown him cruelty. But the journey ahead was uncertain. What if the lion led him into more danger? What if this, too, was a test? A challenge that the boy wasn't ready for? But then, something inside him shifted. He couldn't stay here. The savannah might be dangerous, but so was staying still. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky and weak, and took a tentative step forward. The lion glanced back, then continued to move with that same calm, measured stride. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't running. It was simply moving forward, as if it knew exactly where it was going. And for the first time since the boy had been abandoned, he felt a pull, a sense that he wasn't alone in this world anymore, that he had a companion, even if that companion was a wild, unpredictable creature. The boy's pace quickened. He had no idea what was ahead, but in that moment, following the lion felt like the right thing to do. The lion wasn't leading him into a trap. It wasn't leaving him to die. No, this creature was offering something else. An act of unspoken solidarity, a gesture that no human, no civilization, could ever offer. It was a sign that the boy, despite everything, wasn't forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. As the boy followed the lion through the vast landscape, the sun began to dip lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the savanna. They moved together in silence, the boy's steps lighter now, filled with something new. Hope. But hope, as the boy would soon learn, was only the beginning of what was to come. The lion's presence might have calmed his fears for now, but the dangers of the wild were always waiting, hidden just beyond sight. Would this unlikely companionship last? Would the boy find what he needed to survive, or was this only the start of an even greater challenge? The boy, still following the lion's quiet movements, felt a strange sense of trust that he couldn't fully explain. With every step the lion took, the weight of his fear seemed to lessen. His body, worn out from hunger, thirst, and fear, began to relax just a little, as if the lion's presence was some kind of quiet reassurance. The boy could hear his own breath, steadying in time with the lion's, as they moved together across the dry savanna. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows on the ground, and still, the lion walked on, not looking back but guiding the boy with the steady assurance of someone who knew the land, who understood the rhythms of the earth. The savanna, vast and unforgiving, seemed less so now, as if the lion was leading him out of the emptiness. The boy had no idea where they were going, but he had no choice but to trust. And then, without warning, the lion stopped. It wasn't sudden, but there was a shift in the air, a subtle change. The lion's ears perked up, its gaze fixed on something in the distance. The boy, still a few paces behind, felt the sudden tension, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. The lion's body was rigid, focused, its muscles taut beneath its fur. The boy, heart hammering in his chest, followed the lion's line of sight. In the distance, just beyond the sparse trees and rocks, there was movement. Was it a predator? A threat? The boy's mind raced, but he couldn't see clearly enough to make out what it was. The lion, however, seemed to know exactly what it had sensed. It didn't growl. It didn't rear up in warning. Instead, it took a slow step forward, then another. There was no hesitation in its movements, no second guessing. The boy, holding his breath, watched the lion. What was it doing? Was this it? Was the lion about to face whatever threat was out there on his behalf? Or was it walking toward its own fate? The lion's steps were measured, calculated. With each one, it came closer to the potential danger, but its posture remained calm. This wasn't the posture of a predator preparing to attack, it was something else entirely. The boy's mind was racing, but his legs felt heavy. He wanted to stay back, to hide, but the lion wasn't giving him a choice. As they drew closer to the shape in the distance, the boy could make out figures now, humans, moving about a small campsite. It wasn't much, just a few tents, some equipment scattered on the ground, but it was real. The sight of it made the boy's heart swell. Were they safe? Could these people help him? But as they approached the camp, the lion didn't stop. It kept moving forward with a quiet authority, not like a predator, but like something else entirely. The boy, following instinctively, found himself walking faster now. He had to keep up. The lion was leading him to safety. It was no longer just a random act of kindness. The lion was guiding him. The boy's legs shook as he reached the edge of the campsite, his breath quickening again. Would the people see the lion? Would they be frightened? Would they know what to do? He felt a pang of uncertainty, but he couldn't stop now. Not after everything the lion had done for him. He had to trust. The lion stopped just outside the camp and turned, its golden eyes locking onto the boys. There was something almost serene in that gaze, something final, like the lion had done all it could. It had led him this far, shown him safety, shown him that even in the wild, something could care. But now, it was time for the boy to take the final step on his own. Without another glance back, the lion turned and began to retreat into the savanna. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It simply walked away, back into the vastness of the land it had known its whole life. The boy watched, his eyes brimming with tears. He didn't understand what had just happened. What had the lion known that he didn't? Why had it helped him? Why had it chosen him? As the lion disappeared into the distance, the boy was left standing at the edge of the camp, his body trembling, his mind spinning. The campsite, the people now noticing him, the safety they represented, all of it felt so far removed from the lion's presence, from the bond that had just been forged between him and this wild creature. He had been saved, not by a human hand, but by the one being that could have torn him apart without hesitation. He turned to the people in the camp, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes still fixed on the place where the lion had disappeared. It was the lion. It helped me. It saved me. The people, unsure of what he meant, looked to each other with confusion. But the boy knew what had happened, and though he could never fully explain it to them, he understood now. In the wild, there were no guarantees. But there was kindness, and there was strength. And sometimes, those things came from the most unexpected places. For a long time, he would never forget that moment. The quiet presence of the lion, its protective gaze, the way it had walked beside him, and ultimately, led him to the safety of human hands. It had been the lion who showed him that survival was more than just strength. It was about knowing when to act, when to lead, and when to step aside and let someone else take the lead. The boy, safe at last, would never forget the silent promise of the lion. The lesson it had imparted wasn't just about survival. It was about compassion in the most unlikely of places, and the way, sometimes, it was enough to save a life. The boy, now safely surrounded by the camp workers, was still coming to terms with everything that had just happened. His body ached from the days of hunger and exhaustion, but it was the events of the past hours that weighed most heavily on his heart. As they guided him to the campfire, the warmth of the flames did little to ease the strange chill that had settled deep within him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the lion's golden eyes watching him from the darkness, waiting. But no lion appeared. It was as if the creature had vanished as quietly as it had arrived. The workers, in disbelief, watched him closely. They had no way of fully understanding the bond that had just formed between the boy and the lion, and yet they couldn't ignore the sense of calm the boy now carried. He was no longer the frightened child who had stumbled into the camp. He had been changed by something far greater than survival instinct or fear. "What happened out there?" one of them asked, his voice soft but filled with wonder. The boy, still sitting at the edge of the fire, shook his head, his eyes distant. "It wasn't just the savannah," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. "It was the lion. It protected me. It guided me." The workers exchanged uncertain looks. No one had ever heard of such a thing. A lion, wild and untamable, offering protection to a human instead of following its natural instincts? They had seen lions up close, but never had one shown such compassion. Yet, here was this boy, with nothing but his own words and the palpable change in his demeanor, telling them a story that defied everything they knew about nature. And yet, despite their doubts, they didn't question him. They couldn't. Something in the boy's eyes told them the truth of what had transpired. What could they say? That animals had no sense of compassion? That it was impossible for a lion to do what he claimed? In the face of such certainty, they said nothing. As the night wore on, the boy drifted in and out of sleep. The exhaustion from his journey, the emotional toll of everything he had endured, finally catching up to him. But through the haze of sleep, one thought remained clear: he would never forget the lion. Its presence, its calm strength, it had given him something he didn't even realize he had lost: hope. The lion had been his protector, his guide, at a time when there had been no one else. Weeks passed, and the boy recovered physically, but something inside him had irrevocably changed. He was no longer the same person who had wandered lost and terrified through the savannah. He now carried with him a deep, unwavering belief that even in the wildest places, even in the darkest moments, there could be moments of grace. That sometimes, help comes in forms we least expect. When he returned to his village, he began to tell the story, over and over. Of the lion who had stood by him, of its unspoken kindness, its silent understanding. People listened, unsure of what to make of it. They were used to stories of lions as fierce and relentless, not as protectors or companions. But the boy, now a young man, had no doubts. He could see the lion's eyes in his mind every time he closed his eyes. And every time he spoke of it, the story seemed to take root in the hearts of those who listened. The lesson of the lion, that even the most unexpected connections could be the ones that save us, was a lesson the boy would carry with him forever. For the lion, however, there was no fanfare, no grand recognition. Its role in the boy's life had been quietly, selflessly fulfilled. It had done what it needed to do, not for glory or fame, but because it was the right thing. As the days turned into weeks, and the boy's life returned to a semblance of normalcy, the lion continued to roam the savannah, unseen and unnoticed, its work done. The boy, now a young man, often thought of that lion. of the quiet strength it had shown, of how it had protected him when no one else could. In times of hardship, he remembered the way the lion had simply been there, watching, waiting, offering its own brand of kindness. And though he never saw the lion again, he would always carry the memory of that bond, knowing that some acts of kindness are far more powerful than any weapon. The boy's encounter with the lion wasn't just a chance meeting in the wilderness. It was something deeper, something that left a permanent mark on his soul. As he reflected on what had happened, he began to understand that the lion hadn't simply saved his life, it had shown him what true strength looked like. Strength that wasn't defined by the roar of a predator, but by the quiet, protective presence of a creature who understood his pain and fear. Lions are often viewed through a lens of power and danger. Their raw physicality, their dominance over the savanna, makes them symbols of strength and sometimes of terror. Yet in this story, the lion's strength came from something far more profound than the power in its muscles. The lion's strength came from its ability to choose compassion over instinct. Instead of seeing the boy as something to be feared or avoided, it recognized a vulnerable being in need. And in that instant, when most would have turned away, the lion chose to stay. This moment between the boy and the lion forces us to ask ourselves, how often do we overlook the quiet strength in the world around us? We live in a time where so much of our attention is captured by the loud, the flashy, the aggressive. But what if true strength lies in the softer, quieter acts of care that often go unnoticed? In a world that can sometimes feel disconnected, it's easy to forget the deep bond we share with animals. We often forget that, despite the barriers we put up between ourselves and the animal kingdom, there are moments where these barriers come down completely. When we look into an animal's eyes, we may be seeing something that goes beyond instinct, something closer to a mutual understanding. We may never fully know what the lion felt in that moment, whether it recognized the boy's fear, his vulnerability, or simply saw a fellow creature in need. But what we do know is that the lion acted without expectation, with an innate sense of empathy. Perhaps the lion understood something many humans struggle with, that sometimes, helping doesn't require grand gestures or great sacrifices. Sometimes, all it takes is being present when someone needs you. Whether it's a human offering a shoulder to lean on or an animal quietly offering its protection, the moments of kindness are what matter most. The boy, now a young man, often thought about this. He realized that, in a way, the lion had taught him more about compassion than any person ever could. It was a lesson that transcended the boundaries between species, a reminder that empathy doesn't belong only to humans. Animals, too, can show us the power of selfless love and care, even in the most unlikely circumstances. And maybe, just maybe, there's a lot more that connects us to the animal world than we think. How often do we dismiss the potential for connection with animals? How many times have we assumed that animals, driven only by instinct, are incapable of such depth? The story of the boy and the lion challenges us to rethink what we know about our fellow creatures. It reminds us that kindness can show up in many forms, and that empathy doesn't need to be spoken in words. Sometimes, it's simply a quiet presence, a steady gaze, a protective gesture that speaks louder than anything else. And what about us, as humans? What lessons can we take from this story and apply to our own lives? In a world often consumed by conflict and division, how can we show more compassion, more understanding, in our own daily interactions? The boy learned from the lion that strength isn't just about being tough or winning battles. It's about knowing when to offer protection, when to provide comfort, when to show up for someone who needs you, even if they can't ask. We see the same threads of empathy in the way humans bond with animals. In shelters, rescue operations, or even simple moments of companionship between pets and their owners, there's a deep, unspoken connection that transcends species. Animals, like the lion, offer us more than just companionship. They show us a different way of living, one where trust, protection, and kindness define the relationship. The boy's life, now forever marked by this extraordinary encounter, reminds us that the world isn't as harsh as we sometimes think. There are moments when our faith in kindness, in the goodness of others, human or animal, can be restored. And though the lion may have walked away from the boy's life, leaving the savanna behind, its impact would remain. The boy carried its lesson with him always. That in moments of despair, when hope feels lost, it's often a quiet act of kindness that saves us. So, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, how can you be like the lion in someone's life? How can you show up in ways that others may not expect but will remember forever? The boy never asked the lion for help. It was the lion's decision to offer protection, to lead him to safety. And maybe that's a reminder for all of us, that sometimes we can make the world a better place simply by being there for others when they need it most. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this incredible journey. What we witnessed today wasn't just a story about survival, it was a reminder that compassion can come from the most unexpected places. A lion, often feared and misunderstood, showed us the true power of empathy when it stepped in to help a boy in need. So, what do you think about the lion's actions? Do you believe there's more to animals than we sometimes give them credit for? Could a lion's instinct have been guided by something deeper than survival alone? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. There are countless more heartwarming stories waiting to be shared with you. Share this with your friends, because we all need a reminder that kindness exists in places we might not always expect. Until next time, remember, sometimes the true strength lies not in what we can take from the world, but in what we choose to give. Stay kind, stay curious, and keep believing in the unexpected. See you soon.